Welcome, everybody, to, I'm not sure what number this is, maybe fifth, Conservation on Tap. So we are gathered here this evening to partake of delicious beverages and to learn from some experts. So this month we are having a panel discussion about human-elephant coexistence. So we've been running some outreach to provide information on research and conservation for a few years now. My name is Emily Bennett. I'm from the Okavango Research Institute, and we've been partnering with Condor Safaris for a while to try and get outreach and information out. And we've just started this partnership with the Okavango Craft Brewery recently as a venue. Which has been great because obviously there's the delicious beer. So we have three lovely speakers this evening. We have Walona Sehularo from Elephants for Africa. We have Tempe Adams from Elephants Without Borders. And we have Songhurst from Ecoexist.
Hey, good evening everyone. I'm Anna Songhurst and I'm one of the directors of Ecoexist, an NGO here in Botswana who works mostly in the Okavango. So I'm going to just talk a little bit about human-elephant coexistence and human-elephant conflict up in the Okavango area. So we focus up in the Okavango Panhandle. I just wanted to put this up here so you all know where that is. So it's up near Shikawi. We work mostly on the eastern side of the river between Mahembu and Kudukwa. But we also work down on the western side of the Panhandle from Shikawi down to Mountain. So the area that I'm going to talk about today just kind of set the context of what human-elephant conflict is and how we go about trying to work towards coexistence. Is that we have a situation up in the Okavango area where elephants like to move from the dry land resources down to the delta. And to do that, they're utilising quite distinct pathways. So they move on these pathways throughout the year to get to the resources that they need, partly to do with water, but also to do with other fruits and grasses. And so then what we find is that some of these paths, they go next to or sometimes through or near to cropland. And so therefore we have a huge issue. The biggest issue in terms of human-elephant conflict in the Okavango area is crop raiding by elephants. That's where they're coming into the fields and taking people's crops, things like that. But we've also got a situation where we have direct conflict between people and elephants. So that's where they're coming into direct conflict that can lead to kind of deaths of elephants or humans, or it could be damage to property and things like that. And so with human-elephant conflict and any kind of human-wildlife conflict, it's really important to think of it from both sides because you're talking about people and you're talking about elephants. So it's really important to understand the people's feelings and the needs of the people, and to also consider that there is actual conflict and there's also perceived conflict, both of which are really important when it comes to trying to find coexistence. And then you also need to understand it from the elephant's point of view too, so that you've got it from both sides, because at the end of the day it is a conflict, so you need to look at it from both sides of the story. So you need to understand what the elephants need in that area, what resources they need, and what kind of things that you can do to help them get to what they need to. So when you think about human-elephant conflict, I'm putting up this diagram just to explain to you that it's so complicated. It involves so many different aspects. It involves biology, sociology, politics, economics. All these factors come towards making a conflict situation bad or worse. And so then you need to think about it, okay, there's lots of different factors involved. You need to think about the agricultural elements, the political elements and things like that. The social elements. So I put up this horrible diagram because it is really horrible. It's one of the things that we came up with when we were trying to work out how do we address this situation. And you need to think about the drivers of the conflict, whether they're short-term, long-term, whether they're local, whether they're regional, whether they're national, or even international. So there's global drivers as well. So we put down at the bottom there, you probably can't see it at the back, but it just says blimey, because that was like a response of someone who saw this diagram. So one of the things that you need to think about is that you need to be thinking about long-term solutions to conflict. And one of the things we work on is that one of the biggest drivers of conflict, especially around the Okavango, is the need for people and elephants to share space. So you need to be thinking about how can they share this space? How can they share this landscape? So we do a lot of work on land use planning. And we've identified corridors, like 13 corridors on the eastern side and 26 corridors on the western side of the Okavango, which are clear pathways that the elephants really need to use, and most of the elephants are using them most frequently. And that's been determined by lots of research. And then this has gone into land use planning, working with Botswana Land Board and the different sub-land boards to identify and make sure that there's areas of land that the elephants can use, but also there's areas of land for the people. So like looking at where agriculture needs to expand or where settlements need to expand. So thinking about it from both sides of the story. And then we've demarcated these corridors, so if you're ever driving up on that side of the river, you'll see signs, and that just signifies to everybody where those main corridors are. And the elephants are clearly using them, and now we're doing a lot of work on awareness raising to make sure people understand them too. And then we also look at, you need to think about the short-term aspects too, so the immediate needs of the people, because that's really important when you're looking at coexistence. And so things like how do people protect their fields, and there's lots of different ways you can think about it, like protecting large areas of cropland, or you can think about it on an individual level where people are protecting their own fields. Lots of different strategies that there are that can be used and that we work with farmers on. There's also the whole aspect of safety, because when people are walking, often they're coming across elephants, and so we do a lot of work on safety workshops, making sure people are aware about how to behave if they come across elephants, and also thinking about safety for transport for children, especially getting to school across the corridors. We have an Elephant Express bus service that is operating up there at the moment. And then we're also looking at one of the fundamental drivers of conflict too is where people are food insecure. So if an elephant comes into your field, they can raid it overnight and your whole field is destroyed. That means you can't feed your family for that year. So we've been looking at how to improve that. So thinking about conservation agriculture techniques, sustainable agriculture, improving yields, and ensuring people can stay in the same place every year and keep farming in the same area. And this also links back to, another fundamental driver of conflict is this whole kind of cost-benefit imbalance. So where people feel that there's no point in living with elephants. They're just bringing us all these problems, but we don't see any benefits coming back. So we've been trying to look at how do you change that? How can you bring elephants into people's lives, or people who are living with elephants bring the benefits back because they're living with elephants. Okay, so we looked at like diversifying tourism, crafts, things like that. And then we've also got the Okavango Brewery. So the reason this place was set up was because we were trying to find a way of like farming and how you could support people who are farming with elephants and being elephant aware. So the Ecoexist brewery buys produce from farmers at a higher price in order to bring the benefit back because they're farming with elephants in a way that they're coexisting. So that's another example of one of these types of interventions. And then all of this needs like research and monitoring, so we do a lot of that, like on the elephant population, understanding that movements, population numbers, and the same goes from the people side, understanding how the people are feeling, what they need. And then in the end, coexistence, if you want to work towards coexistence, it takes so many people. So many people need to work together, be involved. It requires a lot of awareness and education. And so we do a lot of work like that. And I think on that note, I will pass on to my colleagues to explain the situation in their areas too. Okay.
Madam, good evening. My name is Walona Sehularo, and I'm the Community Outreach and Education Coordinator for Elephants for Africa. Sorry to say, I could literally just end my talk right now by saying, just take what Anna does in the Delta and transplant it to the Makgadikgadi National Park, which is what we do. So, but we need to make this a bit more interesting. So let's take it back a bit. Everyone knows that the elephant population has decreased quite widely in the past hundreds of years due to many factors, which I won't go through. But the background of why Elephants for Africa exists or works in the Boteti region is essentially that if you were to take it back in the region, most people in that region for a lot of period of their lives had grown up and lived, sometimes haven't never seen an elephant before. And for some people, the first time they remember seeing an elephant was around the early 90s. And, it was just one-off thing that you see far off in the distance. And this all changed a bit back in 2009, 2010, when the river flowed back, and it essentially destroyed the wildlife fence that had been put, and it made it completely permeable. So all the elephants that people would see across the river, because the people of Kumaha are located literally just across the river from the national park. Not just Kumaha, but the people of Maramaoto, the people of Puruhuru, the people of Motopi. And essentially this meant they went from seeing elephants just across the border, across the river, never really interacting with them, to being constantly now raided quite daily. So Elephants for Africa didn't actually used to be in the Boteti region, but we moved out there because our founder and director, Dr. Kate Evans, is very, very much interested in male African elephants. And the reason she went out there was there were a few researchers out there, and they just hit up Kate and said, Kate, we've been in this park for a bit, and we just keep seeing male elephants. We don't see any females, This is sort of your heaven. Could you come out here and do your research? And so Kate went out there, and we used to be a solely research-focused organization. But when she got there, she found that, hang on, there's something happening. The people in this region are having problems with elephants. And so she and also Emily, who used to be out at Elephants for Africa, helped push to focus more on community coexistence. Because it's not worth it to just fully focus your research on elephants and not include the human aspect, as Anna had put in earlier. And we work primarily, as I said, in the Boteti region with the villages of Kumaha, Maramaoto, Puruhuru, but more so recently Motopi, and hopefully in future the villages of Reikops. And to go from a situation where a person has lived their entire life, never having seen an elephant, never having developed that cultural knowledge to say, if I see an elephant, this is what I must do. If I see an elephant, this isn't what I must do. So Elephants for Africa, most of our community coexistence work has worked both in the short term, sort of bring about mitigations that the farmers can use to stop elephants going into their fields. So that's the chili burning, that's electric fencing, but also trialing out some other things just to see what might be effective. We trialed out fox lights. Should have gotten a clue from the name, but we just thought they blink different lights, so the elephants might, not habituate to them. But what we underestimated was these are male elephants and they're very curious. So one night they went in, the light scared them away. Next night they went in and they thought, hang on, what's this? Let me just keep going a bit closer and closer to see what happens. The farmer woke up in the morning and found the solar beacon on the other side of the field from where they had put it. So trialing out all these different mitigations is quite vital, because sometimes some very, very great mitigations that might work, sort of like for Dr. Lucy King, and I know Ecoexist, is beehive fences. These work well both as a mitigation and as an economic source, but unfortunately for us, we are literally smack dab in the middle of the Kalahari Desert on one side and the Makadikadi salt pans on the other side, with a thin sliver of river down in the middle. So this essentially means some mitigations can't work in our area. And so most mitigations from realizing this is that they're dependent upon where they're deployed. And this isn't just on the ecological side, but it's also from the human side. Sort of an example to give is with chili. Chili burning works and it's quite effective. But you need to start burning it from the moment elephants are about to start raiding my field. So sometimes that might be 2 months, that might be 3 months. And that's burning it every single day and making sure you have it prepared every single day. And for most farmers, which tend to be elderly women, that's asking for a lot. And these women already work a lot, making sure their fields are ready, their fields are protected. But adding this extra step on, it tacks onto the feeling of them, why do I need to use this? Can't you just chase the elephants away since they didn't used to be here when I was growing up? And so what we try and tend to focus on is essentially both the education aspects, but trying to bring about, from how I see it, a cultural shift. Because elephants not being in an area before, you don't have that, traditional knowledge on how to deal with them, or even the newer knowledge how to deal with them. And so to ensure, essentially for the next 10, 20, 30, 40, 50 years, that what's happening in Gumaga is actually now happening out in places like Musu, it's happening out in Mukubilo, it's happening out in Mahalape, it's happening out somewhere else. We don't need 100 Elephants for Africas or Elephants Without Borders or Ecoexists. What we need is fundamentally a cultural shift in how we as a people deal with elephants, but also learn to live with them. Because this one is more a personal sort of note from mine, is that in working with the farmers, I used to think coexistent before meant, being happy to live next to elephants. And it might sound a bit jaded nowadays, but what I've found is the most we could even ask for is sometimes for these farmers to tolerate elephants. They might never come to love them. They might never come to, enjoy their presence there, but being able to tolerate them, just as you might have a neighbor in your neighborhood who you haven't talked to for the 10 years, but you tolerate living next to them. The same could happen with elephants. And yeah, I think I'll quickly cut my presentation short there and hand it off to Tempe.
Good evening, everyone. So my name's Tempe Adams, and I'm the Coexistence and Education Manager for Elephants Without Borders. And I've been working on conflict and coexistence for the last 10 years in Botswana. I did my PhD out here with Elephants Without Borders and actually with the University of New South Wales. So the PhD then grew into this bigger, larger program that we now run with Elephants Without Borders. This is not my first slide. That's okay. I saw my team looking a little concerned. So my lovely colleagues here have explained things in such a beautiful, eloquent way. It can be a little bit difficult coming up last, but hopefully I can bring some new insights. So we're largely based in the Chobe district, and this is what conflict and the different definitions of what conflict looks like in Chobe. And as we've heard, it's a very diverse topic, and it means a lot of different things to a lot of different people. And that doesn't mean other people's opinions are more important. Everyone has even stakes in it. So this is kind of a interesting intro of what Chobe conflict can look like. So in Chobe, it's quite unique in that we have agricultural conflict, but we also have quite a lot of urban conflict. Because Chobe is renowned for its elephant population. It's a population that's been there for many hundreds of thousands of years. So as you can see, we've got traditional crop breeding elephants. That's obviously happening. We have new waterhole allocations, and then that can create different conflict. We have what some people might think is lovely, having an elephant in a garden. Other people would think it's their nightmare and the most terrifying thing. And we have literally just driving to work and you see elephants every single day going into work in Kasane and Kazangula. So there's very, very different forms of conflict that we're dealing with here. And as we've heard, solving conflict is very complicated. So coming up with lots of different plans and strategies is necessary and has to be dynamic and has to be adaptable. So what we've come up with is similar to the other two NGOs. We've got a three-pronged strategy. So what we have is we focus on looking and understanding why the elephants are coming into these human areas. What is the motivational drive for the conflict? So that's looking and deploying colours, so understanding the movements, but also understanding and monitoring the movements with camera traps and understanding where wildlife corridors are. So it's really important to understand the motivation behind the elephants and why they're coming into these conflict areas. Then we we've created a deterrent toolkit, again, similar to we have to have on-the-ground mitigations. And then we have an education program, but adapted to the Chobe district. So understanding the ecology of elephants is obviously really important. And a big part of that is monitoring the agricultural corridors, but also the urban corridors. Kasani and Kazangula has doubled in the time that I've been there in the last 10 years, and it's an area that elephants have always frequently passed. So understanding the urban impact that it's having to the wildlife there is really, really important. So we've been monitoring these corridors for 10 years using camera traps. Very simple, fantastic technology, just tells you exactly what's there, when and why. And it's not just elephants, obviously, it captures a multiple array of wildlife. That then gives us the best kind of evidence to try and implement it and really support and show the importance of those corridors. You can't really deny those images. So a number of the urban corridors we now have designated actually in Land Board, which is fantastic. But what is also really important is we can actually compare how elephants are moving in these different human landscapes. So the agriculture versus urban. We've published a number of papers displaying the importance of these corridors, but a recent one that we did that is particularly interesting is just this. Sorry, I promise it's the only graph and figure that's in the presentation tonight. But you can see the agricultural line to movement. So this is the presence of elephants in corridors and agricultural areas, and it's viciously nocturnal. They only come in the cover of darkness. They'll start to come in at 6 p.m. and they'll come in and drink and then go straight out again at 6 a.m. So elephants are really, really trying to avoid our active times. Compared to that of the urban corridors, and elephants will actually come in throughout the day. So what's fascinating is they're actually adapting to our different human pressures and different developments. So we actually are presenting different kind of threats to them. That's important to consider with land use planning. So that's been a recent, very interesting, exciting discovery, which we hope to continue to monitor. This then leads to our mitigation toolbox. So we've created a program called the Ellie Census Program. It's the traditional sense of trying to keep elephants out of crops, gardens, fields, and we've tried to learn from the massive literature that is out there. So we've really invested in the last few years of creating a toolkit that's low cost, because that's got to be fundamental, low maintenance, very easy, adaptable, and solar technology if possible. So it's called the Ellie Sensors because we've got different tools for the different senses of the elephants. But what's the key to this program is actually just the relationships with the farmers and the people that are on the front line of the elephants. It almost doesn't matter what kind of technology you're using. It's based on that relationship and the trust and the dynamic between us and the farmers and the support that we show. So we went about, the Chobe Enclave is largely where it is, so that's an area of Chobe West. It's west of Chobe National Park, and it's on the boundary of Namibia and the Chobe National Park. And this community is an area that's had a huge amount of funding put into it over the years. There's been World Bank funds, there's been USAID funds, a lot of funding's gone in there. And unfortunately, nothing has really stuck over the years. There's very little to kind of show for it, which has been disheartening for the farmers, to say the least. So when we were first going into that area, I was nervous, I must say. I thought there's not much. I don't know what I can do, to be honest. But we were invited by the community, and they really insisted that we come and help and work and just try and learn. So the way we started was just doing one-on-one interviews with people and really trying to learn, do they even want a program? What's worked in the past? What hasn't worked? Where have their frustrations been? What would they be willing to work on and work towards? So it was really trying to foster from the very get-go where the holes and caveats are and how we can actually work together and create a proper, meaningful program. So that's been up and running for the last 5 or 6 years even, and we have 80 farmers now in the program. And there's huge demand, which is fabulous. We can't really keep up with the demand, but we're trying. But it's now working in all the villages in Chobe West, and I'll go on to the next slide. So it brings the question, how do you measure success? Because quite often it can be quite difficult in conflict. Is it the number of elephants that have been shot due to conflict? Is it the number of harvests? What does that look like? It's one of those things we always have to put in reports, but it's quite difficult to relay a conversation you've had with a very excited individual that's had their first harvest ever. you know. So that's why this fostering these relationships is really important. And what we've done is tried to talk to the farmers. What are their goals? What are their end objectives? What would they like to achieve each season? And it's adapted to each of those people. So here's some wonderful little case studies that we have, but the gentleman in the top right-hand corner, his name is Ben. He has a farm in Lusuma village. He was, as of 3 years ago, not a farmer. He was a guide, but unfortunately due to COVID, everything crashed. His business crashed and he had nothing, but he did have land. So he knew farming in Lusuma village, which is on the border of Zimbabwe. It's an area with hundreds of elephants, thousands of elephants passing through it. He said, what can I do? And he contacted us and said, guys, can you come and help me? We came and did an assessment. We had a long dialogue with him. He then said, I really want to be able to get to a point where I can grow some veggies for my community, for COVID to get through. He's now through. He's trialled a number of different mitigations for us, but he's had huge success for our solar electric rope that we have, and he has an alarm system as well, combined with floodlights. And they're not the hard part of it. I mean, he works so hard and he employs his whole family, but he is a success story, and now he is selling all the tomatoes to Choppies in Chobe district, which is pretty incredible. And now he's got his tourism company back up and running. So it's those sorts of stories that is fabulous. And now he's establishing a campsite. So he wants to do a whole ecotourism, farming, agriculture company now, which is fabulous, to show you can actually live with elephants with a combination of a lot of different things. There's no one simple answer. We're also now at a point where a number of our farmers are diversifying their crops. They're not just wanting to do dry land farming. They don't want to just do maize and sorghum, which is really, they've seen some good results, and now they want to start going to veggies and maybe supplying for the village, maybe the schools, whatever it might be. So we're trying to facilitate information sharing around that and what that looks like. And again, similar to Ecoexist, trying to do conservation farming strategies, focus on a smaller area, things like that. But it's great that they're at the point where they're feeling that confident to do that. Another really cool initiative was our grain crushing initiative. In COVID, we bought grain crushers because the community we said what would be helpful. They said we don't need money. We actually just want to be able to eat our grain and put it to our plates quicker and more easily. So we have done now for 3 years, free grain crushing in the community. We've crushed over 7 tons of grain for the community. And just finally, education. We can't get it. It's probably the most important aspect, I think, of the program, and hugely successful. Again, it's very interesting in Chobe. Over 50% unofficially of the population in Kasane and Kazangula are not from elephant areas. So we actually have the opposite problem of the Bateti. We've had elephants there all the time, but we've got people that have come up from Habaroni, Francistown, coming for tourism jobs, and they have never come across elephants before. So it's an interesting dilemma. So what we've actually created is a whole series of educational talks around safety, not just with elephants, but of buffalo, hippo. What do you do when you're walking, driving? Have one in your house. If you have one in your house, that would be concerning if you had an elephant in your house. Have one in your garden, just the different scenarios. So people really, just to know that there's phone numbers you can call, there's people, there's support. So we've been going and doing that at businesses, tourism companies, schools, anywhere and anyone that might be interested in hearing the talks. Additionally, that sort of information we just summarized in educational posters. We did a survey just asking people where they get their information from. And the consensus was the radio and tuck shops. They said tuck shops is where all the juicy gossip is, and that's where we like to know what's up. So we made posters and distributed them throughout the Chobe at all the different tuck shops, and actually in all the taxis, because everyone catches a taxi. So that's been really great feedback. We're always reviewing those posters, those educational material, just trying to stay on top of it. And then we also have done a series of children's books about talking about just key conservation issues. We've translated nearly all of them in Setswana. We try and distribute them as much as possible. The kids absolutely love it, and we try and make them Botswana characters and really, really key it up specifically for kids and the mindset of children, because they, as we all know, are the future generation. If we can get them to really understand and appreciate and learn at that level, then I think there's a lot of hope for the country, that's for sure, and they're the keenest. So yeah, that's the rough sort of summary, snapshot of our Coexistence and education program.
Thank you very much, everybody. right. So I hope. Well, I don't think there should be any questions because they've obviously solved conflict. But just in case, any questions, comments, contributions? I've got a little question maybe to start us off. Obviously, there are a lot of similarities in your different areas. And I imagine that a lot of the, as we know, there are different kinds of conflict, but a lot of it is seasonal. So crop raiding is probably seasonal. Are there any effects of changes in flood patterns or anything like that? Does that affect the conflict levels?
Okay, yeah, good question, Emily. I think around the Okavango, I wouldn't say the flood has that much effect, apart from that it potentially is bringing elephants down to the delta and its resources sooner, or at a different time of year based on compared to just the rainfall. But in terms of the conflict patterns, there's no correlation that we can see. Like the thing about human-elephant conflict, especially if it's something like, all instances actually, is like that it's so dynamic. Like it could be, it could be really, really high numbers in February one year, but then the next year it's April. Like there's so many different factors that can affect it, including rainfall, including resources, including what crops somebody has grown. Like there's so many different things that can affect it. So I would say we've never found a correlation between that. So I don't know about Chobi.
So yeah, it does definitely actually affect them, because if we have high rainfall or big flood, we get the flood obviously much earlier in Chobi. So farmers are actually having to plant much earlier, even though there may not necessarily be the rain. So they actually technically have sort of a shorter planting period in Chobi because of the flood that we get there. Having said that, some people will then do 2 crops for the one season, because then when the flood recedes, then they'll do malapa farming and grow from the receding flood and use the water there. But it is a tricky thing where they have to try and get a harvest in before the flood comes and kills the whole crop. So it's very complicated, and as Anna said, it's always different. So it's a tricky game.
I'm actually jealous because this year the flood hasn't even reached our camp. So. But for us, what we have anecdotally seen that we're now trying to monitor is the elephants are seasonal. So towards the rainy season, you almost get an eerie sort of no elephants sort of presence. So even the farmers themselves know, it's November, it's December, I'm not going to see any elephants. Then right around February, March, April is when we start to see a pickup of elephant activity back in the area again, both in the community land and also in the national park. So we're still trying to find out why exactly the elephants are moving in that sort of way, because as they said, it's very, very dynamic. So comparing from when I started with Elephants for Africa in 2018, I see fewer elephants now than I did then. But in terms of the raiding, it hasn't really changed as much. Or rather, the patterns still seem stable, if I were to use that word. So it could be the many, many different drivers that are all driving these. And another thing is that with climate change happening, there might be even newer drivers than the ones we previously thought would be driving the elephants to our area.
In each of the areas, what is the biggest hurdle? Is it funding? Is it uptake? Is it getting the mitigation implemented?
But I would say it really, really depends. But sometimes it might even be uptake, because noting back to when Tempe said about the World Bank having funded I think it was the Northern Botswana Human-Wildlife Coexistence project. One of the hurdles we had was that the results from that program were, to the farmers, just so horrible that they thought there was no way that you could be able to coexist with elephants. So we had to start with a very tiny group and basically prove first that the mitigations work, and then from there slowly gain the trust of the farmers. And I would say now most farmers are actually evangelists for sort of some of our different mitigations, to say, yes, the elephants might be around, but I can still get something from my field. And funding is always going to be a challenge. Also, more specifically, I would say for staff salaries. I've been working on funding grants, I think, for a year or two now, and it's hard to get the money to keep the lights on, basically. And if you can keep the lights on, if you can keep your staff, it also means sometimes you have high turnover in sort of the organization. Let's say a fresh me might leave college going, I want to work into an NGO. I see them in the flashy cars, the helicopters collaring elephants. It seems extravagant. And you get in the fields, there's no money. There's no money. And you start wondering, is it even worth it to be in this place? So one challenge that for me, basically going back to the education program, is instilling a love for conservation and nature in people, such that we might find that few, because conservation in itself, not many people are going to go into it. Only the most driven, only the most passionate will. So digging up, putting in those seeds in that, in the next 10, 20 years, it won't be Walona coming from Mau going to Kumaga to help bring about elephant-human coexistence. It will be someone from that area doing that, someone from a different area doing that. So I would say it's all of the above, the different challenges, but definitely uptake is a huge one. And also I think one larger one is politics. Sometimes the things you need to do that will benefit the people and the elephants are not popular. And so in some cases, let's take, for example, designating elephant corridors. Some people have an almost allergic reaction to hearing the word corridor. To them, you're going to come in, deprive them of their land, have them move into a smaller piece of land, and forget about them, only protecting the elephants. While in effect, it's not essentially just that. It's, changing the narrative around sort of some of the solutions that we might present to the people. Because in effect, sometimes, I would say, for an example, I think going back to what Tempe was saying, that, they're in demand. We're in demand. Ecoexist is in demand. But we can't service the entirety of Botswana. And we need much more political will, which will come with much more funding, to then put in all these different mitigations that we have found work into practice. So I'll pass on to my colleagues.
That was a very thorough answer. In complete agreement, and that's exactly the issues that I'm trying to think of another one. Interestingly, this is just an interesting dilemma that we have, that we find there's often a lot of jealousy amongst the farmers, especially when they become quite successful, and they certainly don't like to share why they're successful, even with family members or neighbours. So that's been an interesting dilemma. Just assuming that people might work together because they're farming next to each other is a very false assumption to make. And I think that's where the one-on-one relationships that we're trying to build comes into play. That's not always the case. Some people are, it's rare, but some people are very happy to work alongside each other. And we do find very interesting, these are just interesting observations, but if one person has great success with watermelons, everyone will then plant watermelons, and then it floods the market with watermelons and the market goes away. So it's about trying to just diversify the options and let people, there's a definitely big copying trend. So politics and copying trends. I'm just trying to think of anything else, but no, you answered it perfectly. So they're quite interesting problems to have.
Okay, cool. Thank you, Walona and Tempe. I think you've said some good ones there. I think maybe just to add, I think from maybe like I was saying at the beginning of my talk, the whole topic of human-elephant coexistence is so complicated, and it requires like all of those different strategies being done at the same time. And I think that in itself is a huge challenge, because what that also means is that you're trying to get lots of different people to work together, or it might be that you're trying to get a whole group of farmers who have a cluster field to work together, or you're trying to get a small business enterprise to work together, or it could be that you're trying to get different government departments to work together and talk to each other because policies are conflicting. So I think from my point of view, that will probably be our biggest challenge, is that it is such a complex issue that it just requires so much, and so many different stakeholders involved.
So the question is referring to a specific area, but generally probably as well. So in the Nabi area by Wagga Wagga, there are lots of new farmers, and elephants are causing troubles, and they're talking about electric fences. So the question is that a good option? Is there a better option? I think this is probably also one of the challenges, that everyone wants to know what is the solution, and preferably the least, the one that requires the least effort as well. But so, how are electric fences viewed?
No, thanks. I think the main thing to consider whenever you're going to be putting up a fence of any kind is like to understand the situation a bit more, like have a bit more understanding of what's happening. And the reason I say that is like a solar electric fence, they can be useful, and we do promote them in certain circumstances. For example, if you're looking at it as like a landscape, and you're looking at it with land use planning, and you have areas identified that can be protected as a group, like maybe 100 farmers inside, then a solar electric fence is one of the only mitigation measures that you'd be able to put around such a large area, because you can't use chili, it's not feasible. You can't use, bees or something like that. Some of the mitigation measures are good for certain sizes of fields, and certain ones are better for kind of individual level. But also that has to coincide with understanding where the elephants are moving. Because if you go and put an electric fence, and that has happened in some areas where electric fences have gone up, in like an elephant corridor, for example, where elephants are using it more frequently, then that fence won't last. There's no way it can do, So you need to look at it like from the bigger picture and see, okay, can we see where are the elephants moving? And then maybe a solar electric fence around an area of farmland would be a good idea, because that delineates like an area for farming and then an area that the elephants can move. So I think it really depends on the situation. It would need to be delved into a bit more. Sorry, the question was, who can the farmers contact to know what to do? So the best point of contact always is Department of Wildlife, in that area. That would be the first point of contact. And then if there is, one of the closest NGOs can also offer advice, or whatever educational awareness materials we have. So it depends on, I'm not actually, sorry for my ignorance, I'm not sure where Nabi River and Wagga Wagga, whereabouts is that?
Just to add to that, Anna explained it really well, but just to give you guys an idea, in Chobe we've had two very big cluster fence projects erected. One was quite small, it was 50 hectares in Lusuma Valley, and we had one in a village called Parakurungu, which was about 200 hectares, so much, much bigger. And they both failed within 6 months of being built. And it was really sad to see, to be honest, because a lot of money went into it and it was just destroyed so quickly. And it was because of these factors that weren't necessarily considered, and there was very little information actually given to the farmers by government. There was the farmers actually that were meant to be in the cluster fence didn't know each other. So there was a lot of kind of policies where they were told what was going to happen rather than asked what they would like to see happen. So there wasn't nearly enough consultation done with the farming community in both cases, unfortunately, which is just very tragic, because as we're saying, there's limitations on conservation funds, and to see it go into something that could potentially have been successful if it had been done in the right way. So that was just really sad to see. And then now other farmers have seen that failure and said, well, then that's not something we're ever going to want to do, when it could actually be viable if if it's really thought out. And unfortunately, coexistence requires a lot of homework. So it's constant homework and really understanding the motivation and the reason for the conflict and making sure the people in the conflict are agreeing with that. So there's a lot of different levels and layers.
Elephants are smart. That's one of the main things I keep saying to the farmers. Elephants are smart. So with the chili burning, the elephants realize the farmers are only going to burn chili for a certain amount of time. So they would wait for the chili to go down, and then they would go back in. And then they were like, okay, put in electric fences. We put in electric fences. Yes, they work, but I caveat it with we did our homework. So we tried to make sure we weren't going to put them in direct sort of, cutting off elephant highways. So they seem to work. But one thing I do tell farmers constantly is that elephants have learned in other areas how to destroy electric fencing. So it might work now, but in 5 years it might not work, which goes back to layering the different solutions. So the elephant can't really learn all of them. So fencing is also, it sounds easy and simple, but as we've learned, I think it goes back to, putting in a lot of farmers into one place. Not all of them like each other. Not all of them will collaborate with each other. Not all of them will work well together with each other. So you might have a cluster fence with 100 people inside, and then the elephants will keep going into one side of the fence. 99 people are going to point to the one person and say, yo, it's going into your field, it's not our problem. When in effect, it's like a Jenga, it's a house of cards. If one card isn't there strong, your entire field is basically useless. So it's all these different things that might make a sexy solution not so sexy. And I think I will say the farmers at the Ngabi would contact the DWMP, because I do also know that they have this new fund. I'm not sure if it's been fully rolled out, where they will put in electric fencing. But the important thing is that they need to understand the elephants in that area, because ours leave the park, go to community land. For Ecoexist, they were passing through community land to go to the river. So there's many different things to find out before you put in your solution, just to make sure it has a chance of working well.
Just to add to that, crop production is also, there's a lot of different incentives and a lot of support for farmers actually within the Department of Agriculture and crop production. In fact, we work a huge amount with them, maybe more with them than actually DWMP. So there's a lot of schemes and incentives for farmers. So I would say I would talk to DWMP, but I would also get them, whoever is your loudest, strongest farmer, maybe you assist, to go also to crop production and agriculture, because a lot of farmers don't know about these schemes and plans and grants that are actually available. There's very little information. They're not good at getting the information out there. So there is money to help exactly this.
Well, you're being brought up on a lack of answering to the second part of the question, which was, is the better, more environmentally friendly solution than electric fencing?
From my point of view, I think it depends. I think, like we were talking about, I think it's basically elephants are intelligent, so you need to think about lots of different ways to protect your fields. And so there are many different methods out there, and solar electric fencing has got potential in certain circumstances. And like I say, especially when it's like if you're thinking about trying to protect a larger area of cropland, you can't be thinking about using some of the other mitigation measures, because they just aren't feasible. Like, they just either cost way too much, even though electric fences are expensive, but something like a chili deterrent is really good around an individual field, or beehive fences have the potential around maybe a hectare of land, but nothing bigger. So it really depends. So there are potentially, it depends. I mean, environmentally friendly, it depends what you mean by that too. So
Panamatenga, how do they plant and grow so successfully? which is a great question. So people that don't know Panamatenga, it's in the Chobe district and it's a designated commercial farming region. And it's where the majority of the crop production in the country comes from, actually. And that's the answer. It's commercial farming. So it is government run, but it's split up into cells. So people can apply for the cells to farm, and they've got leaseholds on those, and they're large areas. I mean, they're thousands of acres each cell, and these people have serious money. There's massive investment, massive support. So it's a very different scale of farming. But to actually keep the elephants out and the wildlife out, they do actually have wildlife in there. They jump over the fence, but very few elephants, and that's because they have a designated fencing team. And so this team, the fence line is 156 kilometres long, and this fence line is checked twice a day, every day, and they have a team of 5 people. So all the farmers put into a kitty, a pot each month to maintain that fence. And those people go around and, because I asked the same question, I was like, and all the farmers I work with ask, how are they so successful? So that is it. And maintaining, the biggest thing about electricity is it needs to have a high voltage. You've got to be able to maintain a high voltage. And that's what the team pretty much is workshopping all the time. But having said that, lots of other kudu jump in all the time. Lots of animals do jump in. They usually do an annual flush where they try and get all the wildlife out. But yeah, elephants don't generally go in there, but it is to do with a lot of organisation and a lot of funding.
Okay, so the question was for Walona around the Vedeti area. We heard earlier that there are lots of male elephants there, so the question is it still just male elephants, or are there more breeding herds there?
Thank you for the question. To make it short, we do have breeding herds now. Back in 2018, there used to be one breeding herd I would see during the day, and then there would be one that would come out during the night. But now I see roughly around 3 or 4 breeding herds, with some that are much more nocturnal. Unfortunately, we've taken down our camera trap, so we can't see all the ladies that come out to drink at the night. So they are there, but unfortunately, it's still a bachelor's paradise.
I've got a question that you might not like, but Walona told us that when he thinks of coexistence, that actually the best that you can hope for would be tolerance. Would you agree, or would you have another vision of coexistence?
I think from my opinion and from I think our team's opinion, we would agree. Like I think it's to reach a level where the situation is tolerable for both people and elephants. So maybe I would just add in there that it's also got to be tolerable for the elephants. So you've got to think of it from both sides. So, but I think, yeah, you can't, and I think maybe that's why some people maybe kind of dismiss if you talk about coexistence, because they think you're trying to make it sound really fluffy and nice and yeah, let's all love each other and hold trunk in hand and it be like that, and that's not the case, because it can't be. You know, we're talking about a species of animal that is potentially dangerous and does kill people and injure people, so we can't ignore that, but there are measures that can be put in place to make it tolerable. So I would agree with Walona's definition.
Yeah, I mean, everything these two are saying is absolutely correct. It does depend on your personal circumstances and what you're trying to achieve living in an elephant area. So when you're farming, yes, maybe tolerable is like the best that you can ask, try to work towards, but, I think the power, it sounds silly, but we keep talking about education, but the power of education is so important. I mean, when we just do basic elephant ecology talks and just get people to understand that it's led by a female matriarch and they're all related to one another, and actually explain things from a more empathetic elephant point of view in a very humanized way, it is incredible the impact that has. And people really come away going, wow, and I'm talking about, the safety talks that we do. We're talking to lots of different stakeholders, lots of people from all over the country. So I think there's a bar depending on what you're trying to achieve and what your occupation and what your whole experience has been. I think to just, we've also had some farmers that have really shifted their opinions. I mean, really genuinely shifted their opinions. There's one farmer that we worked with, and he had never had a successful harvest, and his field is right next to the busiest wildlife corridor in the Chobe Enclave, and thousands of elephants pass that area. And he got to a point where he just hadn't felt heard. That's where his frustration was coming from, quite honestly. So we had just so many conversations for months and months and months, and slowly we just were trying lots of different things, and now he's at a point where he is managing to harvest. He is getting a harvest, and he kind of laughs a little bit more. And he's get. I mean, I wouldn't say he loves elephants. Let's not go there. But he's definitely shifting his mindset a little bit to understand. He understands why they come down. He understands the motivation that they need to come and drink. He understands all of that. And now he said he can sit back and actually watch them a little more now, knowing that he's getting this harvest, and have a little bit more of a understanding. So I think it depends very much on the individual, on what coexistence really does look like.
So the question is about the personnel for each organisation. How many people are out there actually doing things in the field?
So from Ecoexist side, there's 33 members of our team. And most of our team are from the Okavango. Some of our team are from Maun, and then there are some of our team from other areas of Botswana or international.
We're a little smaller. Within the Coexistence team, there's 4 of us. Within EWB, it's larger, but within the Coexistence team, it's 4. But we are hoping to recruit more people. Funding is a very big issue, as it has been brought up. So yeah, we're a small team.
We're the underdogs. There's only probably about 8 or 9 of us. That's the team on the ground in Botswana. So we have 2 community officers working directly in the villages. A community outreach officer that is much more mobile, working across more of the villages. Me trying to keep all the cogs working on the community side, both in the office and in the field. And then I'd say that's the community coexistence side. And then we have our research team. Because an important thing, as all of us have been noting, is that the research feeds into the community work. So our team is small, hoping to grow in the next 2 months or so, as I mentioned earlier, towards RACOPS. So maybe we'll get a few more people out there, but we're still going to be a tiny team.
Okay, so the question is that obviously you're working in different areas with a lot of similarities, and now we're seeing some expansion of elephant ranges and moving beyond historical ranges. And the question is, so what are you doing for outreach to try and address the expansion?
I will say I've had sleepless nights thinking about this, but I would say it goes back to the very long name working group that we have, is that it's something that goes beyond each individual organization or each individual person, and it's a task that has a price tag that we unfortunately just can't go to anyone and get it from. So some things which are definitely going to help out a lot is the radio outreach. The radio outreach, and also trying a lot more social media outreach. And unfortunately, it will be harder to gain like seeing how effective these are, since, as you are saying, they're going to be reaching out into more areas that we sometimes might not even reach. Let's say down in Kute, they've started seeing elephants around there. So being with the leopard ecology, which I hopefully is in the working group also, is that they can sort of see how our message from up in the north is spreading out down there, and their message we can also see how it goes up to us. So unfortunately, it's a hard nut to crack, but we'll try.
Yeah, I mean, I think I would reiterate that, and the power. What the working group is supposed to be achieving is being able to give feedback direct to government as well about what have been the successes, failures. So then, I mean, government is everywhere, right? So ideally, it should be trickled down and that information passed on to actually go and assist. Like we've done the hard work up here with the high elephant numbers, and hopefully lessons learnt can be passed on and be implemented into policy. All the new policies around conflict and coexistence comes to the working group to be reviewed. There's an example of it in place, but it is a huge dilemma, and it is a thing, as we've all saying, there's limitations on funding and support, and it's complicated, it's difficult, but it is something that's definitely in conversations a lot, and more so now, which is great.
Yeah, I think maybe just to add, like the working group is kind of trying to reach out more like at a national level, but then there are other forums as well which kind of are looking more at the region or international. So there are also those forums that anything that any of the organisations that are doing, say in Botswana or any of our neighbouring countries, can then feed into. So there's like the African Elephant Specialist Group, and they have a Human Elephant Conflict Task Force. There's an international human wildlife coexistence and conflict working group now as well, which involves people from all over the world and bringing kind of lessons and views from at that level. And then we've also got like the Khaza Elephant Sub-Working Group. That's something that's officially now just been endorsed by Khaza countries. So that's Botswana, Namibia, Angola, Zambia. and so that's kind of a forum that it's hoped that can be broken down, and maybe there can be like a task force for those 5 countries, because obviously our elephant population that we have here, it ranges across not just Botswana but also neighbouring countries too. So when we're thinking about these issues and solutions, we need to be thinking about how those things can work in some of our neighbouring countries as well.
Question is from the tourism point of view, what is the most useful thing that could be done to assist with conflict?
Yeah, I think there's lots of different things that the tourism sector could do. I think it depends on your situation and where you're based, and I think obviously there's support in terms of funding for different initiatives that maybe you can be a partner in. And for example, there's the Elephant Express buses that I was just talking about up in the Okavango. That's a good partnership. That's like a partnership between Uncharted Africa, Natural Selection, Conservation Trust, and then the Community Trust and the Okavango Community Trust, and then Ecoexist is helping with co-managing it at the moment. So that's like those kind of partnerships can be formed in different areas for different activities. That's one example. But I think also from the tourism sector side, what we see is often, like we say, it's a really complicated topic when you talk about human-elephant conflict, and what you often find is that people, say, coming in as a tourist from countries where they don't have elephants, really don't fully understand what it means to live with elephants, and that they're coming to Botswana because it's got the most elephants. They're seeing beautiful elephants in whichever part of Botswana they're coming to, but they don't truly understand what it means then for those people who are actually the custodians of the elephants, very much so, like those people who are living in the villages and having to coexist with the elephants to enable there to be the largest population of elephants in the world. So I think there's a really key thing that the tourism sector could do in terms of education as well, but not necessarily within the communities, but more actually reaching out and making sure that our international community understand that, and that they can also, if they want to kind of help and they want to do something, that like to support the people. We always say if you can support the people who are living with elephants, then actually you're really helping with elephant conservation. So.
Yeah, absolutely. I mean, your guides as well, to be honest. Your guides are the ones who are with the tourists every single day. They're the ones who are, that's the Botswana representation. And often I think the guides are obviously very great at talking about the intricacies of the zebra migration, which is very important. But I think sometimes it's good for them to be able to explain what it can be like to be living here and the experiences of people here with the wildlife, because I think often people don't really get to see that or hear about it. We did a guide lecture series actually through COVID for the Chobe Guides Association up in Kasane, because obviously no guides had any work at the time, and they'd always been asking us for information. Researchers don't ever never give information. So we were like, okay, let's take this opportunity to actually put together a 5-part guide lecture series and really try and communicate all the science that we've been working on for the last 20 years. And it was so well received. It was incredible. I mean, we actually, as I said, we did a 5-part lecture series and we had different topics each week. And we had, I'm not totally sure the number of guides that we had kind of go through, and they sort of graduated and all got a certificate at the end of it. But we very much keyed it to be, information in the guide's toolbox that he can whip out when he's on a vehicle, make it really adaptable, and or she is out guiding. And they all actively said it'd be great if our companies could just provide and allow us to get a little bit more information, a little bit more context. So I think, the guides can be great ambassadors in that regard. And obviously funding is great. But having said that, we do have a great initiative going with Desert and Delta safaris. And that was through the CARES movement. So again, just exactly that, getting people to really understand and care about the people living with the wildlife and what that experience entails.
Well, they've said all the words. So what I will say is it's important to share the Botswana story out there. I've had situations where it was a group of National Geographic students and one came in and was like, why don't you just move the people? And she said this from a very not a malicious place, but more from a place where she was like, okay, if the problem is the elephants are going to the field, if you move them further, it will be solved. So trying to get the experiences of the farmers out to the wider world, to say, imagine you're living in New York, you've never seen a grizzly bear, and you wake up the next morning and have to live with a grizzly bear next to you in your garden. How do you adapt to that? Most people, we think, I'll learn easily to live with that. But, trying to put out the story that it's not easy, but it's also not impossible. It's not a cinematic tale to tell, but it's a tale that has to be told. Such that the tourists can appreciate that, the custodians of the elephants, they have a heavy weight on them. And this weight, if it crushes them, it's going to crush the elephants. And so appreciating both the people for being able to live and coexist with these elephants, it will mean so much. Like, go through a controversial debate and you have people from the outside shouting to the people in the inside, and the people in the inside not feeling heard. And sometimes all they need to be is to feel heard and appreciated. Because if I'm going to tolerate elephants, the least you can do is say thank you. Not say get out and move.
Can I just add just one thing? Just everyone talking made me think as well that another big thing that I did mention it earlier, but probably quite quickly, but in terms of tourism, diversifying the tourism product as well is really key. And we have a Life with Elephants tour group that we're working with in one of the villages, and they tourists come in and then they learn what it's like to live with elephants, and that's kind of like one of the tourism activities, which is working really well. And it's like that's a way of educating the guests, but what it's also doing then is actually bringing back the benefit to the people because they're living with the elephants. And the same goes for crafts. If you have people who are making crafts, we have a craft shop in Soronga, which is the Soronga Elephant Wear Craft Shop, and those crafts, they all have a story behind them because they're made by people who are actually trying to coexist with elephants. So if the tourism sector could help to support those kinds of initiatives, and really help to tell those stories, and for the people to reach new markets because they're living with elephants, that's really key as well. And I think throughout Botswana and the region, if we can try and encourage that, that's how we're going to create more coexistence and have bigger impact.
Okay, so moving from tourism to everyone who lives here, all the people. How can people like these here in the audience, how can they collect data or contribute or help? How can you use the people?
I will say, do look out for citizen science initiatives that we might all sort of put out. A few years ago, we had some camera trap images up on Zooniverse. So those helped us crunch a lot of data, but also just come out and volunteer. We always need a pair of hands. The chili prods aren't going to build themselves, the electric fences aren't going to build themselves. Come out and volunteer, and whenever you see you know what I mean. Citizen science initiatives from either of us, put in a bit of your time and help out.
Yeah, I agree with these things. I mean, I think informing yourself, this is the first step. I mean, read up on these organizations. We all have websites. We all have very regular social media sites. We try and put as much of the science out there. We really do work hard on, although we do get critiqued on it quite a bit, but for communicating what we're actually doing and trying to be really honest. And there's always different ways and forums that we can converse, whether it's in person. Ask us what we're doing. It's amazing how many people that I know that don't really know what my job is. So talk to us. And we're always on the end of the phone, email, anything like that. But finding out what the different programs that we have going on in these different areas, exactly that, coming out, joining us, seeing what it all looks like, participating in events that we're organizing is always great. Spreading the word yourself, sharing the information. Everyone can do that. It's easy enough to do. And then if you do see strange wildlife things going on, reporting it is great. A lot of people don't report things. They sort of will just say, contact us, or we can always pass on the message, but I think people can be really angry about certain things they're seeing, but they don't necessarily call up and actually just report it to the right authorities. So I think reporting is always something everyone can do for wildlife, not just elephants.
Yeah, I'd probably just add, drink more Okavango beer. That's a good way to help.
I've been on coke all night.
We've got a question from a young audience member. So in each of your situations, what is the worst elephant problem that you've experienced?
That's a very good question. I think it's quite sad, but it was a really kind of interesting experience. But I was called out to a poisoned elephant incident in Satao, an unknown poisoning, but a very small waterhole had been poisoned, and that was very tough to see and to work it all out. That was very difficult, and that is what, in some ways, conflict does look like. But a positive story that had a nice outcome in the same area, we had an elephant stuck in a well, a man-made well, and it had been stuck in mud for 3 days, and we got a very delayed report from farmers. And after 2 days of digging it out and a lot of effort from farmers and DWMP and our vet and our team, we did manage to get this elephant out, and we did manage to get her all the necessary fluids because she was so severely dehydrated. So we pumped about 40 litres of fluids into her with a drip, and we managed to get her back on her feet, which was really quite an extraordinary effort. And our wildlife vet, Dr. Larry Patterson, some of you might know, said it was one of the most extraordinary experiences he's ever had, to see that, be in that whole process. So that was a big problem, but with a wonderful solution.
I'm gonna be a downer. Biggest elephant-related problem is after there's been a particularly bad encounter between people and an elephant, where people might get hurt or where they might pass away. And you sometimes know that, it's not your own personal failing, but you do sometimes kind of feel that, there should have been something I could have done. Maybe I should have done a lot more workshops in that cattle post. Then that herd boy wouldn't have died. Maybe I should have, told the farmers, there's ways you can chase away an elephant without shooting it, because this goes both ways. And it's sometimes it can be really painful to deal with, but it's realizing that there's things we can do and things we can't do and things we will never be able to do. And so learning that was actually sort of quite important in changing sort of my perspective, because I started feeling, it was impossible. There was nothing I could do. Human-elephant conflict is a conundrum. It's sort of, it's the string theory of the world. It's just not solvable. But it got to a point where I was like, there are things you can do and they work. Seeing a farmer who went from being raided 5 times a day by elephants to not being raided in 3 years and harvesting and thriving, it gives you that hope. So going back to, there was a problem, but there's that little rise up in hope that, there is something you can do. It may be tiny, but it spirals up into something big and beautiful. And one little story I would like to quickly share is we do kids trips, which are graciously funded both in money but also in kind by different tourism enterprises from Natural Selection, Desert and Delta, Bushways, Quandra Safaris. And we had this girl from Puduhudu, and they were going to stay in the park overnight because, shocker, most people who live next to parks haven't actually been inside the parks. So, we took them into the park, and throughout this, there was a game where, we had the kids, pointing out how many elephants they see, how many they are there. And we got to a watering hole, and the bulls were there. One bull came in. Some bull probably hated him. Who knows? Maybe he stole his drink or something. But they went at it. And as they were going at it, you could see excitement in some of these kids. But there was this one little girl, she was petrified. She was terrified. And, it brought it back to me that, there's actually people who, because working with elephants and loving elephants, you sometimes get the rose-tinted glasses on and you think, it's all sunshine and rainbows. But what made it good was, we had not just targeting her, but we had a talk with all the kids, told them a lot of information about elephants, how to stay safe around elephants, and all these different things. And on the way back, she was actually joining in with the kids, pointing out all these different elephants, going from a position where she was, crushed in on herself, hiding away from the elephants and the game viewer, to now participating in it. So she got hope. It really had hope in me that, there's the world is terrifying, but sometimes when you know a little bit, it's a bit brighter.
I don't think I can add too much. I think the worst form of conflict, as we would all imagine, is when people get hurt or lose their lives, and then obviously there's often a retaliation, which means that then the elephants also lose their lives. So I think that is like the worst, the worst feeling. But then all these different interventions that can make it can bring positivity there, because what it means is that you might react in another way. Like you might put in an intervention, like say, just thinking of the Elephant Express bus, for example, that was put in place to try and improve safety, for example. But then what it's actually done, it's actually helped to improve attendance at school, because now more children are actually reaching school. These kind of things, they can have even far-reaching impact than you realise that they were going to, even though you're trying to address that one problem, if you like, or that big problem, but then it can lead on to these other positive outcomes. So I think I'll just... Good question.
Okay, I think we'll have to wrap up there. The speakers are still around, so if you have burning questions to, really make them uncomfortable, then you can approach them. And I'm just going to do that right now with our last little thing. Just very short from each of you. Maybe I know you've given us a lot of information, a lot of wise words, but maybe if we can get from each of you just a brief take-home message.
There's a Botswana saying, I'm trying to remember it correctly. Morotoa isiwaela, arelevantsi morwalela. Directly translated, it means, single person's urine, it'll make a trickle. But a lot of us, it becomes a flood. And it's essentially to say, pitch in where you can, the little you can help with helps. If you're having a discussion with someone somewhere and he tells you something about an elephant and you're like, there's no way this is true, just sit down with them and Google it. And let's say, look it up on our Facebook pages. You don't know what that little change might do to that person. Because especially those of us who have lived all our lives next to elephants, our counterparts down south don't know a thing. And so they have a lot of myths around them. And these can be dangerous both to them and to the elephants. So it's important that we share sort of our own personal lived experiences and ways different organizations, different companies have tried to make it better to live alongside elephants. So I would say my take-home message is talk a lot about elephants.
Yeah, I think I would just echo that. I think the take-home message is that when you're thinking about like human-elephant conflict or solutions to it, that just to appreciate how complicated these things are and that it requires so many people. So everybody needs to be involved in some way, and there is so much that everybody can do. Even like Walona's given an example, just even listening or talking or learning more. I mean, that's key. So I think, take-home messages that it's a really complex issue that all of us need to try and work towards the solutions.
I agree. Just to reiterate the power of listening. I think that's been the key tool for our Coexistence program. We, especially at the beginning of the program, many years ago, we just had a lot of anger being thrown towards elephants and about elephants, and quite right. And I think a lot of the anger, as people were saying, was just they just had never felt heard. So I think really hearing someone out, and that could be for hours, they might be yelling at you. But don't cut them off. Just let them, because you can learn so much by really hearing what those issues are and what those problems are. Because when you are done hearing, then you can actually start to have a conversation. So I think that's something we can all do in life. But that's been, I think, the biggest thing that I've learned is just the power of listening, and then you can start to have a conversation.
Thank you all very much. I know I enjoyed this evening. I hope everyone else did. So yes, maybe we can just get a round of applause for our lovely panelists.